For BioBuzz. I'm super excited to be here today with Ali. Welcome, Ali, to our first ever Career Catalyst event. This is really exciting to have this. We have a pretty good turnout too. Yeah, thanks for showing up for this.
Yeah, thanks for thinking of me, Tara. When you described it, I was like, yeah, this sounds awesome. I'm
Yeah.
totally
When we
down.
started pitching ideas, Ali was the one of the first people I thought of. I've been following him on LinkedIn for a while. He gives great career advice, as I'm sure some of you in the audience already know. But as a bit of a background, so Ali is a PhD researcher turned industry expert. So we briefly worked together at Protein Tech, but he then spun off and made his own company, Trulicita, and now helps people figure out their own way to shine in the biotech industry and find roles. So he's going to be sharing a bit today about how to make yourself stick out and find a role in the biotech community. So, Ali,
Thanks
if
for
you
that
want to,
intro,
yeah,
Tara. Can you just be my hype person,
right.
like
I'm just
wherever I
trying to
go?
improv the best I can, you know? So, yeah, Ali, if you want to go ahead and get started, the floor
Yeah,
is
I'd
yours.
love to. Let me bring up my presentation and get this screen sharing business good to go. Okay, I will share a Chrome tab.
I feel like this is where all the pressure of doing a virtual
I
talk
know it
comes in.
really is. Pressure's on. Okay, there we go. Can you all see my screen?
Yes, we can see it now.
Okay, cool. So today really is going to be a high level overview of making this transition from academia to biotech or pharma. Um, and we're going to cover several things here. So I may spend a few minutes giving a little bit of background on myself and how I sort of ended up where I am right now. And then we're going to talk about just awareness of what it's like working in industry. So we'll talk a little bit about career options, how company size may factor into your decision, what are some subsectors of this industry, what are some roles that you can focus on as you're coming out of your graduate program, what is the day-to-day like working within the biotech industry, how does that affect your mindset and the way that you prioritize things. Then we will talk about specific methods for sort of facilitating that transition, the importance of knowing your own strengths and weaknesses and limitations, where you can actually begin. And then this part I think is really important is truly understanding what failure is and defining it in a way that helps you and is adaptive. And then lastly, we'll just cover key takeaways and we'll have some time for Q&A as well. So a little bit of background on me, got my PhD at Texas A&M. I was officially it's in medical science, but I was in immunology lab. We were B-cell immunology, but I was sort of the one that was like, hey, I think T cells kind of matter too. And I sort of became like this hybrid B-cell, T-cell biologist. I then did a postdoc in microbiology, followed by another little bit more industry-facing postdoc in medicinal chemistry. Then I decided that academia was not the path for me and that I wanted to go a different direction. And so I went into the biotech scene here in San Diego, spent time at BioLegend as an immunologist. I was very familiar with their products for flow cytometry, then went over to a diagnostic company called Trivian, and then went to two different startups, both of which were focused on the genomic space, one in terms of spatial biology and the other just in terms of your standard single cell sequencing type technology. Then went into a little bit of part-time consulting, just doing technical diligence for a venture capital firm and started my own business too. So let's talk a little bit about where you might be in your journey right now. So some of you are probably in graduate school and getting ready to graduate either with your master's degree or your PhD, or maybe some of you are postdocs, or maybe some of you are finishing undergrad and you're trying to figure out, do I go to graduate school? Well, when you finish, whatever you do, you have several options. And so one option is quote unquote industry, which we'll define. The other is entrepreneurship. You can go work for a nonprofit or a non-governmental organization. You can stay within the halls of academia, or you can go into government. So for me, industry was the clear choice, because at that time, entrepreneurship was too risky. I didn't know enough. Nonprofits also seemed risky. I'd heard a lot about, just funding challenges. Academia was not viable for me, and government to me, I'm a little bit allergic to bureaucracy, and so government was just out for me. So I wanted to figure out, okay, how do I get into this biotech industry? And so that's what the focus of this talk is going to be. And so what I'd like to do is maybe just start off by talking about some differences between academia and industry that'll be important for you to know and acknowledge, because this will affect whether industry is right for you. So what's really attractive about academia is that, in theory, you are independent in the sense that you don't necessarily need permission to study something. You need money. And so your permission is coming from grant funding and your relationship with your PI. Once you parse out your project, you can focus exclusively on that project, and you can come up with an unlimited number of ways to do new things without worrying about, really permission from anybody. If you have the money to do it, you can do it. Industry is a little different. So in industry, you are able to have a much wider impact because there's nothing that you do that isn't intended to eventually lead to a product that ends up being used by another researcher or used diagnostically or therapeutically in a clinical setting. Because of the sheer scope of that work, teamwork becomes a much bigger thing. It's very uncommon to just solo something in industry unless you're at a very, very small startup. Because of that, speed is very important because time is one of the biggest things that results in the usage of money. So the faster you do something, the more likely you are to conserve expenses and to get to market sooner, because you also have to remember that you have competitors in industry, and sometimes it's better to cut the requirements of a project and get it out the door sooner than to have it be 100% perfect. Of course, it depends on the context. We're not talking about sacrificing safety. We're talking about, if we're producing a research use only reagent, maybe revisit some of those requirements and ask yourself, does the customer really want that, or is that something that we said we wanted? There is a mentorship aspect in industry, but it generally comes at the management level. And then the other two parts are that communication becomes incredibly important because of the teamwork aspect and just the sheer volume of people you'll be speaking with and coordinating with across different business units, sometimes across different countries and time zones. And of course, because the foundation of all of this is to generate revenue and profit, you have to understand the business context of everything that is happening. So let's focus first on company size, because when people say, oh, you want to get into industry, that doesn't actually mean anything. There's no one industry. There's so many different variables here. So let's talk about some of those variables. In general, you're going to either be at a startup or a mature company. If you're at a startup, there's in general 3 different phases of funding and scale that these startups will be at. One is pre-seed. So that generally means they've raised money from friends and family, or they're independently wealthy. Maybe they've put $200,000 to $500,000 into the business to just get something set up. It's not unusual for pre-seed companies to not have a physical location. They might just be 4 to 5 people working remote and contracting all their work with contract research organizations or development and manufacturing organizations. The next stage is what we would consider early stage funding. So this is usually seed to Series A. Not uncommon here for a company to be working with anywhere from 2 million to 20 million or more. And so as a result of that, you may expect 10 to 15 employees. You're still very early on. You don't have a whole lot of process set up. And most of those employees are doing multiple different functions. So they say you'll be wearing many hats. And so the idea here is that, yeah, you might be doing some lab work. You might be calling some companies to see if they can do contract some services for you. You might be involved in some negotiations, even though you've never done that. So that's sort of the draw here of these types of companies. The challenge is you might run out of money next week. And there's a lot of risk involved. You're competing against huge companies, which may put you under. At the mid-size, now you're kind of established. Usually, we're talking about Series B or above, so we're looking at $50 million or more into the company. Not unusual to have 50 to 100 employees here. Now you have a product. You're kind of out of the R&D phase, and you're in development. So you're in the D phase of R&D. So you're working on actually making a product that can end up going to market. Now, this product could be equipment, it could be a therapeutic asset, could be a platform, could be a particular technology in terms of assays or kits, something like that. So generally, companies after they get to mid-size will either grow and remain private, or they will grow with the intent of going public. So this is what we're talking about, mature companies here. Public companies is a little bit more scrutiny. And I think as we've seen over the last 2 years, they have a responsibility to their shareholders in the stock market. So a lot of the layoffs that we're seeing are, at least last year, were at publicly traded companies, and they laid off so that they could increase their stock price. And in a lot of cases, that was effective. So there's a little bit more risk at a public company, but the benefit is very mature, well-established systems, and the possibility that you'll get some equity and that will increase. So these are just some things to think about. There's no one right answer. There's no one that's good or bad. It kind of depends on your preference. So if you want to be creative and work on a small team in a sort of high risk environment, these early phase startups are great. If you want to show up to work, have your work well defined for you, and just have it be a little bit narrower in terms of scope, then a larger company is better for you. Just keep in mind that things will be a little bit slower, and you will have to learn to navigate some bureaucracies. So in terms of the different sectors within industry, at least for people in the life sciences, usually the primary sectors are biotechnology, med tech, pharma, med device, or health tech. There are other sectors that you can go into. They just tend to be a little bit less common, and that's healthcare, publishing, or consulting. Consulting, especially difficult to get into without some prior industry experience. So suppose you've identified what's the size of the company I want to go to, what's the sector I want to focus on. Even within that, there are additional considerations that you need to make. And so for people coming out of their graduate programs, in general, you'll fall into one of 6 buckets. You'll either be on the R&D side, which is what you're very much used to in your academic lab setting. You may be involved in operations, which often revolves around manufacturing, logistics, things that have to do with executing. You may be involved in quality, so that can include both quality assurance, which is a little bit more internal policy and policy enforcement, or you can be in quality control, which has to do with testing and specifications. You can go onto the marketing side, which can involve either content marketing or technical marketing. These are great roles for people who enjoy teaching, because a lot of what you may be doing in a marketing role is teaching other people's how your assays, how your kits work, and really being a voice for the company. In a sales role, you'll be working more one-on-one with people, or you may be doing some field training. A lot of my PhDs that are in my program who are interested in sales go into field application science. So that's FAS. And I will say that of all these roles, the ones that tend to pay the best are sales. And I think that's true across many industries. And then you can get into project or program management where you don't have people reporting to you, but you are managing all of the different projects of others, managing timelines, tickets, escalations, things like that, and making sure things are moving along and reporting that back up to executive leadership. So even within those roles, a decision that you will need to make is, do I want to be an individual contributor, which is what you've been used to so far, or do I want to be in a managerial role where I have a team and I'm managing people? This is not the same as managing undergraduates who are rotating in your lab. This is much more involved. Then you have to ask yourself, do I want to be at the bench, or do I want to be in more of an analytical setting where I'm doing more dry lab work, like analysis, analytics, computer work? You don't have to choose one or the other. There are hybrid roles where you do the lab work, you do the analysis, and maybe you're doing a little bit more reading. That's actually very common. And then lastly, who do you want to interact with? Do you want your interactions to primarily be with people within the company, or do you want it to be external? So engaging with CROs or other companies that are partners or customers. That will determine the trajectory of which type of role you select. Okay, so let's get a little bit more specific. What can you expect in terms of your day-to-day? So most of the time, if you want to break in, you're going to probably need to move to a big city. That's most industries in big cities. And so if you're not used to having a commute, you will get used to it pretty quickly. In my case, I'd never lived somewhere where I needed to have like a long commute. And so for me, it was a little bit of a culture shock spending 45 minutes driving to work and an hour driving back. It's not unusual to have anywhere from 1 to 5 meetings per day, depending on your role. And you'll probably be balancing at least 3 projects at the same time that you are responsible for. Scheduling will become a big part of your life. A lot of what you're doing is, especially if you need to call meetings, is just trying to coordinate everybody's schedule so you can all get in the same room at the same time. And it's not unusual to read or respond to at least 10 emails per day. Again, this can go up or down depending on what your exact role is. In terms of prioritization, as I mentioned, you're going to have multiple projects. And so being able to track projects in a way that is keeps you on task and organized, but also communicates where you are to the rest of the organization is important. And very often you'll have software that will do this. Especially in the startup setting, you'll need to be comfortable with changes and priorities. Something that you stayed in the lab until 8 p.m. to finish on Friday, on Monday, that might not matter anymore. On Monday might be, okay, well, you know what? We're pivoting. We're not going to do that anymore. So if that's something that bothers you, a small startup may not be the best place. There is a very high focus on safety and documentation, especially in companies that are more mature. And so I can just tell you that in almost all of the labs I worked in academia, it was not uncommon to have a coffee in the lab. It was not uncommon to eat in the lab. It was not uncommon to not wear a lab coat or not wear safety glasses. That none of that will fly in an industrial setting, especially at mid-size or above companies. You'll get warned maybe a couple times, and if you don't adhere to the policies, you're going to end up having a meeting with HR. And so like overall, this is a good thing, right? Safety is very important. So just, get used to this idea that there are rules in place and that those rules aren't just for optics. Like people actually enforce and follow those rules. On top of that, documentation is very important. And that's because of just the sheer size of the company. If you have 2,000 people coordinating on a therapeutic asset, you need things documented because you're not going to be able to all talk to each other and have turnover. And so just for the continuity of the project, documentation is very important. Overall, the main principles to keep in mind are time management and balancing your efforts. Hey, how are we doing on time, by the way? Speaking of time management, we're at 20 minutes.
Yeah, 3 more minutes.
3 more minutes. All right. So let's skip over some of this stuff and just talk a little bit about how to actually break in. So here are some principles that are going to be really important. These are business principles. So super important to be able to do market research to find the right role for yourself. What this comes down to is make a list of the skills that you have and search for roles based on those skill sets. Look for companies who are hiring for your skill set and make a list of both the titles and the names of the companies. From there, you start building a network. This is sort of an exercise in business development. So you make a roadmap of which companies do you want to talk to people in? What are the titles of those people? Which departments are they in? And how do you go about sending them messages when you don't even know them and actually building a relationship? The next part is inbound marketing. So the idea here is you're putting something out into the world. These are your LinkedIn posts, or my LinkedIn posts anyway, and people see them, and the people who are engaged by those ideas will reach out to you. So the communication is coming in, it's inbound. So in your case, this is going to be optimization of your LinkedIn profile, commenting on other people's posts, and creating content. Your outbound marketing is basically something you're sending out into the world to a very specific targeted person and their response to it. In our case, this is going to be resumes and CVs. Make sure that you're speaking directly to the needs that are stated in the job description, and that only. Interviewing is an act of sales, right? So they want to know if you're a good fit for their company. If you were a product, this would be all about product fit. So know your audience, speak their language, and address their needs in their language. If that goes well, you'll be invited to give a seminar talk. This is product demo. This is where you get to go demonstrate all of the things that you've done in a talk and be able to answer questions about it on the fly. And then the last part comes full circle back to market research. Now you've gotten an offer and you need to understand, in terms of data, what are the salaries that are typical for your geographic region? How would you go about getting an outcome that both of you want? So overall, these are some business principles that are very important for generating leads and actually closing deals for yourself in order to land that job that you want. The last thing that I want to bring up is this idea of failure. So there's 2 types of failures. There's micro failures. This is a word that I use. And then there's gross failure. Micro failures are just little mini failures. They're temporary. They're low cost. They're like a single point of failure. You generally catch them as they happen. They're completely correctable and they're completely necessary. The only way to be successful in an endeavor is to identify your micro failures and fix them in real time. And they generally involve realistic thinking. Gross failures tend to be long-term. They tend to be very costly and they add up. They're cumulative. So it's like 3 points of failure. And it generally comes from ignoring a problem. By the time you go to address it, that ship has sailed. These are always preventable. These generally come from ignoring problems, delusional thinking, or not having systems in place to catch red flags. So at the business level, these are things that will sink a company. At the individual level, the micro failures are things that you need to do, especially in your job search. So when you end up getting a rejection from something, sometimes it's got nothing to do with you, but always ask yourself, what are some micro failures I can identify here and what can I learn from without punishing yourself over it? Okay. If any of you want to, I didn't get to share like all the content because I probably spent a little bit too much time on some of it. But if any of you want to learn more, just feel free to scan this QR. I have a bunch of free resources on my website. There's podcasts, videos, and a cover letter template, things like that. So feel free to go there to learn more, and you can always connect with me on LinkedIn as well.